I couldn't sleep, so I decided to use the bathroom. And when I looked at myself in the mirror, I was shocked. A mini heart attack. When I looked at my reflection, it was completely distorted and kept changing. I couldn't recognize myself for a few seconds, and even after realizing it was me, the image kept shifting its shape. I stood there, frozen, watching this strange figure in front of me. When I finally managed to tear my eyes away from my reflection, I went to lie down. But before that, I decided to look at my reflection in the bedroom mirror. After a few seconds, my face began to deform again, and when I blinked, it would return to normal. But after a few seconds, it would start distorting again. Enough. I just threw myself into my bed, under the covers, and tried to sleep. Moral of the story: I think I'm delirious a little more than usual. This had only happened once before, a few months ago. I think it was in September. I remember looking at the rearview mirror of the car from the back seat and simply not recognizing myself. It was only a few seconds, but they were the longest and most terrifying seconds. It was as if there was a stranger in your place, giving you the feeling that you were trapped, but on the outside. I kept trying to identify myself in the reflection, and I don't know why, but my brain started seeing my little brothers. It was my reflection, but I was seeing my little brother's face. He is 14 and I'm 17, so it was not kid-like features. It was really terrifying. I didn't react. I just stayed silent, trying to focus on finding my true reflection. But it felt like time had stopped because it was so slow in those moments. Overall, this first time wasn't as bad or intense, at least not that I remember. The worst was the recent episode, which was bizarre and long. It's relevant to point out these were 2 isolated cases. It hasn't happened more than that, although the recent one has made me kind of freak out. And that's why I decided to ask for answers. Anything. I was a highway patrolman for 20 years, and I've seen it all. High-speed chases, gunfights, near-death encounters. But nothing compares to what happened in the summer of 2018. It was the graveyard shift. The stillness of the night had a way of amplifying every sound, every shadow. Most nights were the usual mix of speeding drivers and DUI stops. That night started no differently. I was stationed at my usual spot near mile marker 62, radar gun in hand, coffee thermos perched on the dash. The radio buzzed with routine chatter. Then just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee, dispatch chatted in. Any available units near Route 18? We have a 1090. I was confused. I'd never heard that code before. Dispatch, this is Unit 504. What's a 1090? Silence. Dispatch. No response. Just static. Seconds later, coordinates popped up on my patrol car's computer. It was an isolated patch off the highway, deep in the woods. Uneasy, I radioed my supervisor. Hey, Sarge. Dispatch just paged me about a 1090. What's the protocol? His response was curt. Ignore it. It wasn't meant for you. Seriously, they gave me coordinates. Drop at 504. Get back to work. I hesitated, but orders were orders. The night dragged on with routine stops. Around 3 a.m., exhaustion hit, so I pulled into a donut shop. Yeah, I know the stereotype, but sometimes you just need the sugar rush. The shop was a dive, peeling paint, flickering neon sign, but it was open. Behind the counter stood a man so pale he looked like he'd been carved from marble. His fingers were unnaturally long, and he moved with a stiffness that gave me the creeps. What'll it be? His voice was raspy, like dead leaves rustling. Just coffee, and a couple of glazed. He slid my order across the counter without a word. His gaze lingered on me, unblinking, as if he were memorizing my face. Long night? He asked, his lips curling into a faint, unnatural smile. Yeah, graveyard shift. Never gets easier. He chuckled, a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. Be careful out there. You never know what might be lurking. I left in a hurry, the bell above the door jangling behind me. I was halfway to my car when the radio crackled again. Help me! The voice was faint, distorted, but unmistakably human. I froze, my heart hammering. "Dispatch, this is Unit 504. Did someone just broadcast a distress call?" No response. I tried my supervisor. Nothing. Curiosity gnawed at me. Against my better judgment, I punched the coordinates into my GPS and set off. The drive took me 45 minutes. Deep into the highway forest. The road narrowed until it was barely more than a dirt path. My headlights cut through the thick darkness, revealing gnarled trees that seemed to close in around me. When the GPS announced I'd arrived, I was in the middle of nowhere. I stepped out of the car, gun holstered, flashlight in hand. The silence was unnatural. Not a single insect, not even the rustle of leaves. I radioed again. "Dispatch, this is 504. I'm at the coordinates. What's going on?" Static. I took a step forward. The ground was hard beneath my boots, but I couldn't hear my own footsteps. The air felt heavy, oppressive. Then behind me, a twig snapped. I spun around, flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. "Nothing. Who's there?" I called, unholstering my gun. The radio crackled to life again. "Help me!" The voice was deafening, as if it were screaming directly into my skull. I dropped the radio, clutching my ears. Before I could react, a heavy blow struck the back of my head, and everything went black. I woke up, tied to a tree. My hands and feet were bound with rough rope, my head throbbing. The air reeked of damp earth and something metallic. Blood, maybe. 3 hooded figures stood before me, their faces obscured. They whispered among themselves, their voices low and guttural. One stepped forward. "Why did you come here?" I got a call. "A distress call," I stammered. "Why are you here?" The figure repeated, more forcefully. "I was just doing my job. Look, killing me won't do you any good. My team knows I'm out here. They'll come looking." They whispered among themselves again. Then one of them nodded. "Let him go," the leader said. Another figure stepped forward, cutting my bonds. My legs were weak, but I managed to stand. "Take your gun. Leave. Do not come back." I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my weapon and stumbled back toward my car. My head swam, and my limbs felt heavy, like I'd been drugged. As I made my way down the path, figures began emerging from the shadows. Dozens of them, their faces pale and featureless. "Don't come back," they chanted in unison. "Don't come back." I reached my car and sped out of there, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. The next morning, I reported everything to my supervisor. He dismissed it as exhaustion-induced hallucinations and put me on paid leave. But I know what I saw. Even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that they're still watching me. I kept one of my radios as a memento of my time on the force. Sometimes, late at night, it crackles to life. "Help me," the voice whispers, and sometimes it calls my name. Tonight, I've made up my mind. I'm going back. I don't care what's waiting for me in those woods. I need answers. The forgotten town. The Wilson family was tired of city life, the noise, the crowds, the relentless grind. So when they stumbled across an online listing for a sprawling, affordable home in the remote town of Eldermore, it seemed like fate. The photos showed a charming place, surrounded by dense woods, complete with a white picket fence and a wraparound porch. Too perfect to resist, they packed their things and set out, ready for a fresh start. From the moment they crossed the town's boundary, something felt off. Eldermore was eerily quiet. Not just quiet in the way small towns often are, but unnaturally so. The streets were deserted, the air thick with stillness. The old gas station attendant who handed them the keys to their new home barely spoke, offering only a cryptic warning. "Stick to your own business and you'll be fine." The Wilsons shrugged it off. Small-town folks could be eccentric, after all. Their new home was everything they hoped for. Spacious, cozy, and steeped in an old-world charm. But as they unpacked, a peculiar detail gnawed at them. The clocks in the house were all stuck at 11:59, every single one. Days turned into weeks, and the Wilsons tried to settle in. John, the father, spent his time repairing the creaky floorboards and fixing the overgrown garden. Emily, the mother, started painting the scenic views from the porch, while their teenage daughter, Claire, explored the woods nearby. The people of Eldermore, though polite, remained distant. Their smiles felt rehearsed, their conversations stilted. Claire was the first to notice the strange phenomena. On her morning walks, she'd spot townsfolk standing completely still, staring at nothing. Sometimes, she'd catch a faint murmuring sound carried on the wind, like a prayer whispered in a forgotten language. When she mentioned it to her parents, they brushed it off as small-town quirks. But then Emily started having dreams. Vivid, disorienting dreams of shadowy figures gathered around a massive clock. They chanted in unison, their voices low and guttural. "The cost must be paid," they said over and over. She woke up drenched in sweat, her heart racing. Unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, Emily decided to dig into the town's history. She visited the local library, a dusty old building that smelled of mildew and secrets. The librarian, an elderly woman with piercing blue eyes, hesitated before guiding her to the archives. "You won't find much," the librarian said. "But if you value your sanity, stop looking." Ignoring the warning, Emily pored over old newspaper clippings and faded journals. She discovered that Eldermore had a history of bizarre occurrences. People who visited rarely stayed for long. The town's population had remained the same for over a century, with no records of births or deaths. And then there was the Eldermore clock ritual, referenced obliquely in several entries, but never explained. That evening, Emily shared her findings with John. They decided to confront their neighbors directly. When they knocked on the door of the couple next door, Mrs. Harrington answered with a vacant smile. "The clock must never strike midnight," she said, her voice flat. Then she shut the door. The next day, Claire went missing. Panic-stricken, John and Emily searched the woods, calling her name until their voices were hoarse. They eventually found her in the town square, standing among the townsfolk, all of whom were gathered around the massive clock tower at the center. The clock hands trembled, teetering on the edge of midnight. The townsfolk chanted in unison, their voices a haunting drone. "The cost must be paid. The cost must be paid." John and Emily rushed forward, but an invisible force held them back. They watched in horror as Claire stepped closer to the clock. Her eyes were glassy, her movements mechanical. The townsfolk's chanting grew louder, drowning out John's desperate cries. Just as the clock was about to strike midnight, a blinding light engulfed the square. When it faded, Claire was lying on the ground, unconscious but alive. The townsfolk dispersed without a word, their expressions blank as they returned to their homes. Claire woke up later that night, but she couldn't remember anything about what had happened. Emily and John decided they couldn't stay in Eldermore any longer. They packed their belongings and left under the cover of darkness, vowing never to return. As they drove away, the clock tower's bells tolled in the distance, a chilling reminder of the town they'd left behind. Back in Eldermore, the townsfolk gathered once more around the clock, their faces illuminated by its eerie glow. The cost had been paid, and the town's grim secret remained intact, waiting for the next family to stumble into its timeless trap. The ghost train. The night was damp and cold, the kind of chill that burrowed deep into your bones. The old Iron Valley train line had been abandoned for decades, overgrown with weeds and whispers of ghostly tales. It was said that anyone who dared to ride the train that appeared there under a full moon would never return. Most dismissed it as an urban legend, but for Emma, Jake, and their friends, it was the ultimate thrill. "Come on, guys, it's just an old train line," Jake said, his breath fogging up in the crisp autumn air. He was the ringleader of their group, the one who always pushed them to try the most dangerous stunts. Besides, who doesn't want to say they've ridden the ghost train? Emma hesitated, pulling her jacket tighter around her. "This doesn't feel right. Why would anyone leave a train to rot out here?" Her voice trembled, half from the cold, half from unease. The stories she'd heard as a child about this place crept back into her mind. "Relax," Jake said with a grin. "If we don't see anything, we'll just head back. No harm done." The group ventured deeper into the woods, guided only by their flashlights and the silvery glow of the full moon. After an hour of walking, they found it, the train. It sat on rusted tracks, its windows dark and lifeless. The black metal of the engine seemed to swallow the moonlight, its presence unnervingly intact for something so old. "Whoa," muttered Brandon, their resident skeptic. "This thing looked too clean." Jake climbed the steps to the train's door and pushed it open with a groan of rusted hinges. "Come on, let's take a look inside." One by one, they filed in, the air inside stale and cold. The train cars were eerily pristine, with red velvet seats and brass fixtures gleaming as if they'd been polished yesterday. A faint smell of smoke lingered in the air, as though the engine had just been running. "This is insane," Emma whispered. "It's like it's frozen in time." The door behind them slammed shut, making everyone jump. "All right, who did that?" Jake barked. But the nervous glances exchanged among the group told him no one had touched it. Then with a lurch that nearly knocked them off their feet, the train began to move. "What the hell?" Brandon yelled, rushing to the window. But outside, the forest blurred into an inky darkness, the trees vanishing into nothingness. "Someone's driving this thing," Jake said, charging toward the engine car. The others followed, their footsteps echoing eerily in the narrow corridor. When they reached the engine, it was empty. No conductor, no controls, nothing but a faintly glowing lantern swinging from the ceiling. "This isn't possible," Emma whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "How is it moving without—" Her words trailed off as the lights inside the train flickered. Shadows danced along the walls, their movements unnatural, jerky, and then they heard it. A low, guttural moan, growing louder with each passing second. "We need to get off this thing," Brandon shouted. He yanked at the door's handle. The Silent Carnival. It was a quiet summer evening in the town of Willow Creek. The air hung heavy with the smell of fresh-cut grass and a hint of rain. People were settling into their routines when the carnival arrived. No one saw the trucks roll in, or the workers set up. One moment, the empty field near the woods was barren, and the next, it was alive with lights, towering rides, and colorful tents. The strange part, there had been no announcement, no posters, No sound of engines or hammering, nothing. It was just there. The townsfolk were intrigued. By morning word had spread. A carnival, right here in their sleepy town. Families gathered, children begged to go, and even the older folks, who usually avoided such festivities, felt an odd pull to see what this was all about. The entrance was unlike anything they'd ever seen. A massive archway of intertwined vines and glowing bulbs seemed to hum with energy. A sign read, "The Silent Carnival, a world beyond imagination." There was no ticket booth, just a smiling woman in a flowing crimson dress who waved everyone inside. "Enjoy the show," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Inside, the attractions were breathtaking. A Ferris wheel spun with lights that painted the night sky in shifting colors. A maze of mirrors seemed to stretch infinitely, reflecting versions of visitors that were not quite them. The food stalls served delicacies no one could name, but tasted heavenly. Every ride, every game, every performance felt like magic, but something was off. The performers, while talented beyond belief, seemed detached. The trapeze artists soared through the air with precision, yet their faces were blank, their movements mechanical. The clowns, instead of eliciting laughter, brought unease with their too wide smiles and silent gestures. The magician's tricks were astounding, but his eyes never blinked. People shrugged it off, too mesmerized by the carnival's wonders to question it. It wasn't until dusk turned to midnight that the truth began to unravel. Claire Benson, a local school teacher, noticed her husband, Sam, hadn't returned from the funhouse. She searched frantically, her calls swallowed by the carnival's ambient hum. She asked the crimson-dressed woman for help, but the woman simply smiled and said, "Perhaps he found a new role to play." Claire's heart sank. She ran to the funhouse where she swore she heard Sam's voice calling her name. But inside, all she found was an endless hall of mirrors. In one reflection, she saw Sam, but he wasn't himself. He wore a jester's outfit, his face painted white, a frozen smile etched across his lips. He reached out as if trying to warn her, but his movements were stiff, puppet-like. She stumbled back, her mind racing. Across the carnival, others were noticing similar oddities. A young boy found his older sister performing acrobatics she'd never learned, her eyes void of recognition. An elderly man spotted his wife in the bandstand, playing a haunting tune on the violin, though she'd never held an instrument in her life. By now, panic set in. People tried to leave, but the entrance was gone. In its place stood a wall of mist that swallowed anyone who stepped into it. Cries for help echoed, but the performers continued their acts, unbothered, as if this was all part of the script. Claire, determined to save Sam, sought answers. She found herself drawn to the center of the carnival, where a massive tent loomed. Inside, the air was thick, and the scent of burning incense made her head spin. The ringmaster stood on a raised platform. He was tall and gaunt, his top hat casting a shadow over his face. His voice, deep and resonant, cut through the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to eternity. Here, you are not merely visitors, but the show itself. Your fears, your joys, your very essence fuel our magic. Each of you plays a part forever." Claire's blood ran cold. She demanded Sam's release, her voice shaking. The ringmaster tilted his head, amused. "Release?" he echoed. "There is no release, my dear. This is your new home." But Claire refused to give up. Spotting a golden whip coiled at the ringmaster's feet, she lunged for it. The moment her fingers wrapped around the handle, the tent shuddered. The performers froze, their blank expressions faltering. The ringmaster's smirk vanished. "You dare disrupt the order?" he growled, his voice reverberating through the tent. "Give him back," Claire screamed, cracking the whip. A blinding light erupted, and the carnival began to crumble. Tents deflated, rides disintegrated, and the mist at the entrance lifted. People ran, stumbling into the safety of the field as the carnival dissolved into nothingness. In the chaos, Claire searched for Sam. She found him lying in the grass, his jester's outfit gone. His eyes fluttered open, confused but alive. Others emerged, shaken but free. The silent carnival was gone, leaving no trace it had ever existed.